Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
All right, gentlemen, it's time for yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. My name is Scott McKay, at Scott McKay on Twitter, Real Scott McKay on Instagram, Scott McKay on YouTube. You can also find us on the web at www.mountaintoppodcast.com. And as always, I do invite you to join us at the thriving group for men on Facebook called the Mountaintop Summit. With me today is a friend of mine from the Great White North of Canada. His name is Myke Macapinlac, and he is a social skills coach who specializes in coaching shy guys. And today we're going to talk about why technically skilled guys, they suffer so much with women and attracting them, relating to them, getting second dates, and even sometimes having relationships. Myke, how's it going, man?
Hey, Scott. First of all, I'm really impressed you pronounced my last name correctly. That's bang on, man.
Yeah, I think we covered that the last time.
Well, you remembered, so I'm impressed.
Yeah, I struggled through that one until you corrected me, I'm sure. And this time I was able to nail it the first try. Good memory, I guess. But anyway, this is an idea you brought to the table, and it's something we've never talked about here on the show. Sure. Not because I personally can't relate to it, but I just don't think we've ever had the right guest to cover it. And I'm sure you're the right guy. How much do you see this issue come up in your practice? And what do you think the scope is with which guys suffer from this?
So I've been working with guys, specifically engineers, programmers, and developers for the last, I would say 7 years now. And the same issue keeps coming up over and over again. These types of individual, typically when they hit their late 20s, early 30s is when they reach out to me, and their background, man, I swear to God, I can swap their names, I can swap their current city and their birthday, and it's the exact same issue, right? So a lot of them have these technically skilled guys have invested a huge portion of their life pursuing academic success, especially the ones from, India or Asia or something. They grew up with very strict parents who drilled in their heads to go to school, get good grades, and get a good job. And then when they, make the money, so to speak, right, and they're successful professionally, then everything else will take care of itself. Well, unfortunately, that's not the case. That advice may have worked back then, maybe back in the industrial age and the knowledge era, things are different, right? You need more than just academic knowledge to succeed professionally. You also need people skills because, if you think about it, once you get into, getting promoted into management, so to speak, where you're leading people and you're doing less technical work, if you haven't had training on how to connect with people and how to manage people, then how can you function in that role properly, right? And a lot of them, their lifestyle is very typical. They go to work, they go home, and then that's it. Not because they don't want to socialize, but because they don't know how. So, I really feel for those guys because I've been there myself back in the day. Having worked as a structural designer for an engineering company in the past.
Well, I'll tell you, even if you are in a highly technical position, if you face customers at all, the skill set of being able not only just to be personable with those customers, but maybe make recommendations that lead to more sales or more revenue for the company is often the differentiator between you getting a job at a certain firm versus all the other guys who are filling their resume with the same alphabet soup you are.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's sad that a lot of these guys, they want to connect with people. And something that they tell me all the time is that it feels like there's a glass wall that separates them from connecting with people. And it makes sense, right? I'm sure you've discussed this in the podcast in the past. Learning how to be social is just like any skill set, right? And the first thing you need is you need to be aware of what you need to learn, and you need to practice over and over again. And if you do that consistently, then you're going to get results. So with these guys that I work with, a lot of them just don't know any better. They don't know how to manage their thoughts. They don't know how to stop overthinking. They don't know how to be likable. They don't know how to present themselves well. They don't know how to go out and network and build rapport with people. Not because they don't want to, again, but just because they've never taken the time to learn how. So that's why they struggle socially.
What, in your opinion, makes someone more likable?
Well, there's some traits that make someone likable. The first one would be, I would say, is their overall vibe, right? And the analogy that I always give to my clients is whatever you feel, other people feel. So if you've ever been around someone who's angry or sad, like for people here who have been around those people, I'm sure they know that it's an unpleasant experience. But then if they've been around someone who's happy and positive, then they know that those kind of people tend to be easy to spend time with. So the first tip to likability is to be able to manage your emotions, right? If because whatever you feel on the inside, you'll project on the outside. The second thing would be, like if you take a genuine interest in other people, if you show, like genuine curiosity, you pay attention to them, you listen to them, especially today, we're so distracted with social media, our smartphones and stuff. It's very rare that you interact with someone who's actually, like making eye contact, like actively listening and giving you their full undivided attention. And lastly, I would say someone who lives an interesting life. It's hard to be an interesting conversationalist and engage people if you don't have a lot going on for yourself. So if your typical routine, again, is to go to work, go home, hang out with the same people on the weekend, you got to change it up, man, because you can't have interesting stories if you're doing the same things over and over again.
All three of those are bang on accurate in my estimation. The first one, you're talking about not being what they call in Spanish, pesado, which directly translates to being heavy. And I live very close to Mexico. I've been immersed in Mexican culture for decades now. And one thing I know about Mexicano people is they love the party, they love the fiesta, they love to have fun. Everything, if it can be laughed at, joked about, so much the better. And I think a lot of times middle-class white people don't have enough of that going on in their life. But what will happen if you act like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, people in Mexico will start joking that you're pesado. You're not lightweight. You're not light. You're not happy. You're heavy, man.
Yeah.
And I call it the Schleprock factor, and I'm probably dating myself, but Schleprock was a character from Hanna-Barbera Flintstones cartoons, the newer version from the 70s. And he always had a dark cloud hanging over his head, literally. And whenever he showed up, something bad was going to happen. He just brought bad luck with him. And he was like, oh, woe is me, blah, blah, blah. And he's become an iconic symbol for someone who's just negative all the time.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times guys are suffering from that Schleprock factor, and it's just not any fun. And I've had guys come to me to coach live, and I realized almost immediately that there was this pesado vibe about them. And as soon as they were able to rid themselves of that, and sometimes it's not as easy as it appears to be to do that, women responded more powerfully to them immediately. The second thing you mentioned, of course, is this idea of helping people feel better, not only in the moment, but about themselves. And I'm thinking now, I did an audio years ago, and I'll go ahead and link to it on the show notes page, which was called, coincidentally enough, or maybe not so coincidentally. I mean, this is a serious topic that affects a lot of guys we're talking about here, but I called it The Engineer's Guide to Being Cooler Than the Sales Guy. And it's an audio on how to be socially wonderful to people. Because I think a lot of times when guys are in the IT world as engineers or programmers, they get really fed up with the fact that the sales guys aren't technically skilled at all, yet they're making twice as much money. I mean, why is this fluffy guy worth all that money? Well, it's because nobody's buying anything until they like the person selling it or until they feel good about buying it. And a lot of times, because it's not the skill set of a technical minded guy, they don't see any value in it. So the same guy who is very technical, who thinks that sales and marketing is just fluff, for example. That's why I used to hear it Lucent all the time. I'd present to our customer together, and there's a bunch of engineers in the room talking to other engineers, and they'd be going through the PowerPoint slides going, okay, this is marketing fluff, marketing fluff, marketing fluff, marketing. Oh, here we go. And they would skip everything that they consider marketing fluff. And what they were skipping was every reason why they should buy our brand and our product instead of any other set of bits and bytes that the competitor was selling. But I mean, a bunch of engineers talking to each other, who cared, right? Well, I think a lot of times guys carry that mindset over to their social interactions. And those guys may be the very same ones who try to logic their way into a woman's graces. Like, okay, I have this degree from Yale. I am good at this particular set of technical things. I make this much money a year. I will buy you this gift or take you to this restaurant, which will translate to you giving me 3.2% of kisses and blowjobs. I mean, it's like they're taking a slide rule to this thing, and women are just like, what? You know,
I literally work with a guy who's exactly like that, like how you described.
Oh, I could count 300 guys I've ever worked with who are like that. They're all,
it's crazy.
Like you said, it's all the same guy. They fit the same profile, you know?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Even Mystery Method back in the day, the one time I've ever actually spoken to Eric von Markovic, I mentioned this to him. I said, you know, it was amazing how you caught lightning in a bottle by taking this set of social skills and turning them into an engineering algorithm. I mean, you know, it would be, okay, when you're in part A, you want to execute on B. You know, he would break down social interactions into tabs and slots. And I promise I'm not making this up. His response to me was like, I guess you're right. I never really thought of that. Like, it was unintentional on his part that he did that.
Yeah.
But that's why it worked, because it gave engineers and left brain guys a technical way to do social things, which was accidental genius, right? But that's what it takes. It takes understanding that people want to feel cool about themselves, that women want to feel light. They want to be joyful. A lot of the guys I know who are very successful with women, a lot of them are funny, you know, they're quick on their feet with ironic humor, etc. But really, if you find laughter and joy in everything, like, hey, look at that guy over there, and you start laughing, you've almost won the battle just in that. I mean, if you can stay light and just help women have fun, and you seem like you're bringing the fun, not necessarily being the life of the party or being a professional comedian, but just helping people feel good about being with you. And especially if you build them up and compliment them, not in an obsequious way, but in a way where you're just helping them feel good about themselves. That's the essence of being cool. I mean, the douchey guy is the guy who thinks he's cool, but he's really not. And he's putting other people down, trying to make himself look good. You know, he's bullying people or whatever. The guy who's really cool, even if he's a multi-billionaire or world famous or visibly better at everything than anybody else in the room, he's the guy helping other people feel better about themselves. You know, my kids are involved in a sport, and there's a coach who is quite literally an Olympic hopeful who coaches my son and my daughter and a bunch of other kids locally. And he never talks about himself and how good he is. All he does is help the kids feel like they're doing better. They're going faster. Wow, you're going to be even faster than me someday. And the kids just love him. And the parents just love him.
Yeah, for sure.
The third thing you mentioned is the interesting life.
Yes.
A lot of guys have not paused to think what they're even interested in. They just get up and do the same thing they did yesterday, and the next thing you know, they're retired and they haven't done anything but come home, make dinner, watch reruns, get up in the morning, go to work at a job they don't like. And I mean, go Wikipedia surfing, go YouTube surfing, find some things that are interesting to you, get out of your damn comfort familiarity zone and try them. You may actually realize you like them if you just get out of the house and try something new, which for a lot of guys who are left brains in a binary way, there are those things that you do and those things you don't. And the gray area is sometimes hard to reconcile, isn't it?
For sure. Yeah, you know, I totally agree with everything you said. And a big part of being likable, you know, comes down to emotional management, right? You know, if you can make yourself feel good, you know, if you adopt a mindfulness practice where every morning you sit down, you meditate even for a few minutes, right? Just to get out of your head, slow down your thoughts. And then, you know, like you come up with things that are going well in your life. You know, let's be honest, right? Like, you know, shit happens to everybody. Nobody's life is perfect. You know, like we all have our flaws and shortcomings or whatever. But the thing is, what are you going to focus on, right? Because you can focus on what's not going well in your life, which ironically you'll attract more of, or you can focus on what's going well in your life, right? Not only will you feel better, you'll be in a lighter mood and in a more positive headspace. And when you're putting out that kind of vibe, you're going to attract more of it, right? You know, both in opportunities and also with relationships, because, you know, who wants to be around someone who's grumpy and pessimistic, right? You know, we don't want to be around those kind of people, but people are gravitated towards people who are positive and optimistic, right? And if you can be that person for everyone that you talk to, you're just going to get along with everybody. You'll be a people magnet.
Yeah. You know, what's funny is you were talking obviously we're addressing the guys who are really smart technically. And those are the same kind of guys who let analysis turn into paralysis.
Yes.
Analyzing everything to the logical bitter end. And the way human nature works is that almost always turns into a negative visualization. It's like natural entropy applies to our mindset. Hardly any of us are like Michael Jordan, where the more we visualize ourselves making that game-winning shot, the more likely we are to do it. I mean, that's an excellent skill to attain, but it certainly isn't the natural state of affairs for the human mind, is it?
No, exactly. We're usually drawn towards, negativity, especially if, growing up, if you've always been kind of that, pessimistic person, and if you've never learned how to manage your thoughts and improve the way you feel. I think a lot of people just, especially those who don't have a mindfulness practice, right? They just go through their day, they keep doing things. And that's why, in my opinion, the guys that I've worked with who are very high IQ, they have a hard time reading people because they're always in their heads and they're never in their body. That's why they have a hard time being empathetic, because they can't even name their own emotions. They suppress how they feel, and that's why it's hard for them to open up and connect with people, just because they've never understood how to manage their emotions. And you can't take someone to a place that you've never been to, right? So how can you connect with someone on a deep emotional level when you haven't been there yourself?
I think a lot of times guys in this position we're talking about depend on women to lead them, which is never attractive. Why can't women approach me first? Why can't they come and brighten up my day?
I've actually heard of that before.
Have you really?
Yeah, a lot.
There's whole marketing programs about, hey, here's women approaching you first, and here's how to get women to throw themselves at you.
Exactly.
That's not the natural order of things. That's not how women are really going to respond. And what I love about what you're talking about is that once guys are willing to break through and give this a shot, even though it's something they've never done before, that takes a huge level of personal vulnerability. But when guys can kind of set that mental trigger that, hey, what I'm doing actually indicates strength, not weakness. I'm a better man because I'm now willing to do this. I think that's sometimes the catalyst we need. And you mentioned something about being in our heads and not our bodies. I think that's sort of an Eckhart Tolle-esque ideal that's bandied around a lot. Could you give these guys a quick primer of what that actually means? Because I'm not sure most of us know how to sort out the definition of being in our bodies rather than our minds.
So I think a lot of guys that I've worked with, especially guys who are, extremely technical, they tend to logicize everything, right? They think that 1 + 1 is always equal to, when, in some cases that's not always going to be the case, right? So what I mean by that, especially when it comes to connecting with people, there are a lot of things, for example, dating specifically, attraction is never logical. It's an emotional process, and a lot of guys who are very technically skilled, they never seem to understand that, kind of like what the example you gave earlier. Oh, I do this job, I make this kind of money, and I paid for all your dinner, therefore you should be my girlfriend. Like, in their head, it makes sense. But then you see the guy who, he's saying a lot of stuff that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but he's funny, he's comfortable in his own skin. And even though he's not as, quote unquote successful on paper, because he knows how to push the right buttons and, trigger attraction in women, he gets the girl. And for the guy who's technically skilled, to him, it doesn't make sense. So that's kind of what I mean by, getting out of your head and into your body, because, connecting with people isn't always a logical process. There's an emotional component to it, and you can't really succeed in that realm if you're not emotionally aware, if you're always in your head. So what I mean by that is, just like understanding your emotions, like even naming the different kinds of emotions that goes in your body. And when you can do that, then you can put yourself in other people's situation. You can be more empathetic, and which will therefore lead to deeper connections if you're able to do that.
Love it. You know what? Have you ever dated a woman who was technically skilled, like a left brain smart woman?
I have, actually, yeah.
Yeah, they're out there, and they usually have similar struggles, don't they?
Yes.
It's not gender specific.
And to be honest, that's why our relationship didn't last for too long, because we were too similar, because I was already like that.
Isn't that the irony there? Yeah.
There was no polarity. I feel like I was dating myself, and I thought it was cool, but then we were too similar, and, I wanted someone more feminine, and she definitely wasn't like that.
And all these techie guys are thinking to themselves, man, if I could just find a woman who is techie like me, someone who's geeky like me, then we could make babies and live happily ever after. And then that house of cards falls on the first date because they're exactly alike. And, that brings us back full circle to this idea of guys, if you're technically minded, you're going to be a great compliment to a woman who is very social and very artistic. You just don't realize it yet because you look at a woman like that going, oh my goodness, she's so social. How do I relate to her? Don't worry. She knows how to do that. A lot of times that really is the case, that those opposites attract because they complete each other. She's going to be in awe of your ability to perform all sorts of amazing things and be a hero in all sorts of extraordinary ways she can't even begin to imagine. I'll tell you, in our house, a lot of people don't know this, but I'm the right brainer. Although I will say this, when I was in the IT world, I was vulnerable enough to go learn how to put together electrical engineering flowcharts because they were overwhelming to me. But I had to know what I was selling in order to be good at selling it. And when you got to Lucent, they didn't tolerate anybody at that level who wasn't technically astute, Mm-hmm. So I did the grunt work to figure it out. And once I got the hang of it, it got a little easier for me. It isn't that my brain was incapable of processing that kind of information. It's just wasn't what I preferred to do. So I think if you're a left brainer and you're wanting to become more social, if you're wanting to figure out more right brain things, I would say get out of the comfort zone, let it spin a little bit. And I think your brain can probably cover whatever you perceive to be a deficit there. And next thing you know, you'll be doing better than you thought. But like I said, in our house, I'm pretty much the right brainer, although I have forced myself to become more balanced in that regard. My wife is very similar in the fact that she has done the heavy lifting to be able to perform in a right brain manner as well as a left brain manner. But I'll tell you, naturally, she's the left brainer in the family. She's the one who loves to do taxes when we get on. I mean, I don't even know how that works at all. But what's even more dumbfounding to me, quite literally, is when we get on like a 14-hour flight to Asia, she'll sit there and do Sudoku puzzles the whole time.
Wow.
I can't imagine finding that fun. But she'll sit there and go, oh, okay. And I look at those things and the numbers just swirl around in a vortex to me on the page. I'm like, what in the world is going on here? But that's my wife, and because she's done what it takes to be more right brain and I've done what it takes to be more left brain, not only do we complement each other, but we appreciate each other. And I think that's pretty cool. That's going to be a neat byproduct of almost compelling yourself based on desire to go ahead and activate that other side of your brain.
Exactly. One of the things that I get my clients to do in the program is I get them to write out their stories in advance, right? Because a lot of them just, they just give logical answers. What do you do? I'm an engineer. Like, where are you from? I'm from this city. Like, they just give like one word answers, very logical. So I get them to do this exercise where, I teach them what makes a good story, right? There's 3 parts to a good story. I just get them to write out their stories, right? Because a lot of them they've never learned how to tell a good story. So by them just like preparing in advance, just like writing an exam, like you wouldn't write an exam that you didn't study for, right? And if you have, then you know how nerve-wracking it could be. So the same thing with guys who have never learned how to tell, an emotionally compelling story, just by them preparing those stories in advance, right? They're in the forefront of their mind. So by the time they go out and they interact with people, because they've trained their brains to just come up with these emotional stories ahead of time, they're able to communicate more confidently because they've taken the time to come up with what they want to talk about. The same way that your wife has learned to be more creative and you've learned to be a little bit more logical. Same with guys who are logical too. They can learn to be captivating storytellers if they just take the time to learn how.
What a wonderful coincidence that, unbeknownst to you, we just did a show completely on storytelling. And what you've done is you've just underscored the importance of getting that skill set right, which I applaud, definitely.
Oh, perfect. That's awesome. Yeah, it's definitely a learned skill. And if you take the time to come up with your stories, then number one, you'll never run out of things to say. Yeah, because you took the time to come up with, the things you want to talk about, you'll be quicker on your feet because you'll be able to relate to people quicker. And you'll also be more comfortable having conversations because you understand how to answer some of the most commonly asked questions in a way that's emotionally engaging and compelling.
What else can guys who are left-brainers do to increase their overall attractiveness to women? I mean, we've talked about some of the key elements there. Let's throw some candy at the parade as we're running out of time here. What are some very practical ways that guys can do that? Because I know that's what they're looking for. After all, they're the left-brainers, right? We want practical things. Give me the tactics, right?
To be honest, the biggest thing that's going to help guys who are left-brainers to be more socially confident is to just get out of their heads and stop overthinking. That's number one. Number two is to be kinder to themselves. So if they practice self-compassion, because I find that guys who are very, like super high IQ, they're all or nothing, right? They either do something or they don't do something, And as you know, with anything, with any skill, with any new thing you're trying to learn, everyone's bad when they're starting out, like no one's just great at something right away. So giving yourself compassion and understanding that, there's going to be a period where you're not going to be so great, but if you keep going and you practice the right things consistently, over time, you're going to be good at it too. Just like anything. And kind of like what I mentioned earlier, social confidence is something that can be learned and developed. And I would say the last thing, kind of like what we've talked about a few moments ago, just really take the time to prepare your stories, right? If you just, think of like answering some of the most commonly asked questions, like what do you do for work and what do you do for fun? If you just come up with some fun stories to answer those questions, I think those things would really go a long way if you actually implement them.
Good stuff, man. I want to go ahead and direct these guys to where they can listen to your podcast. MountaintopPodcast.com/Myke, and that's MYKE. That's how Myke Macapinlac spells his first name. And you'll be able to partake of his podcast, as I know you guys are listeners, you're voracious consumers of podcasts, and you'll be able to get in on Mike's podcast and all the good juju that he's spreading forth to the world and learn more about his books and his programs and his offerings. It's all there for you at www.mountaintopodcast.com/Myke, MYKE. Myke Macapinlac, good to have you on as a returning guest. Great conversation as always, my friend.
Awesome, Scott. Thanks again for having me. I appreciate you as a host.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you as a guest and a host. I've been on your show too.
Exactly.
Right on.
All right. Take care, man.
Yeah. And guys, if you haven't yet been to www.mountaintopodcast.com, here's my question for you. What's it going to take? What's it going to take for you to get the women that you've been looking for? How are you going to move beyond mere hope, which is not a strategy, and get the kind of women you deserve into your life? That's what we can talk about when you get on the phone with me for 25 minutes. It's completely free. All you do is click the button at www.mountaintopodcast.com. Let's get on the phone. I'm exactly the guy you're expecting me to be. I'm down to earth, and I want to talk about you, your future, and the greatness you're going to experience once you get the right women in your life, culminating in getting the right woman in your life to build a future and build a legacy with. Go to www.mountaintopodcast.com and get that ball a rolling. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.